Bueno, Vamos empezando. Bienvenidas.
Let us resume. Be very welcome, everyone. Be very welcome, the people that are online. I do apologize because in the first session I forgot to make the effort to say hello to all of you in remote. Let's try for that in this round table they can hear us from home. The people that are in the remote session. I know it was difficult for you to listen to us in the first session. So let's start the second round table where what we want is to talk, transmit, reflect, think, talk and transmit how we tackle the discomfort in this situation. José Pijem was talking about this so bluntly. So how can we take care of the current bad being from the Gestalt? We've heard the different tips about what is it that we have. Both of them have told us that we've got the capacity to get into contact, to be together, for all of that we should have from Gestalt. So that's what we're going to be covering in this round table. Let me just add that I think we're suffering the value of non-limits, omnipotence, narcissism. We've already talked about them. But for the psychic structure, the lack of limits, it's very, very harmful. And since 20, 30 years already, we find at our offices people that have got a more fragile psychic structure, which is different. We're different. We are created differently depending on our situations, of course. So our way of working, I think, that also requires other ways of intervening, listening, placing ourselves. We're going to be covering these topics in this round table for sure. And let us start with Ángel Saavedra. I will introduce them later on, but I'm going to make first a short introduction of what we're going to be covering. So Ángel Saavedra is the current president of the Spanish Gestalt Association. He's going to cover different implementation areas. Then we will listen to Margherita Spagnuolo with her field's perspective, including everyone, and she refers to the evidence of uncertainty, favoring dissociation and narcotization. And then José Pérez, who will be talking the new theoretical contributions on interaction and changes in our psychic structure. So, Ángel Saavedra is the current president of the Spanish Association of Gestalt Therapy. Everybody knows you. Founder and director of Lamar, a school on Gestalt psychotherapy in Malaga. He's trained in many disciplines. He's the co-creator of the couple therapy program creator of Growing in Couples. He's a member of different teams of the government of the region of Andalusia for social intervention with families. He's a member of Humanism of the official board of psychologists of Eastern Andalusia. So, Ángel, you have the floor. Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you all for your presence and for your contributions. Well, let's focus everything that revolves around the psychological discomfort, as Jordi and Carmen have been talking about. But I wanted to start with the fact the WHO foresees that by 2030, mental health troubles will be the second cause of mortality and morbidity after the ischemic heart diseases. This includes these psychological discomfort, this unease. How is this produced? Because of all these factors that for some time that may vary can generate an altered functioning of organisms. But I don't want to focus on that. I want to focus on the consequences that this may have to psychosomatic affections, sometimes physical feeling of chest pain, claustrophobia, fear, loss of reality, dissociation, and that you cannot confront. It's a slogan as like make the impossible possible. If you want, you can. Everything is at your reach. There's nothing you cannot do, or you can get everything you want. Well, this is making us slaves of these slogans, of these mottos, where the person cannot fail. There's no space for failure. You cannot know something of what you want in life. There's little room for uncertainty, for void, for emptiness. And this is felt with technology, with the cyberspace, with virtual realities, and even the metaverse, where you can buy yourself a house and invent a different reality. I'm going to focus on the work carried out mainly with family care teams and minor social care teams, minors teams that we work with in Andalusia, but basing myself on the three basic pillars of Gestalt: here and now, being in the present, responsibility, and living aware. So now when I start working with these teams, I was talking the other day about this on another round table, the therapist's job is like the job of a farmer, cultivating the land. You have to work little by little. Many people did not come from humanist lines, cognitive conductual psychoanalysts in the best of the cases, but generally speaking, they had no personal work at all. So the first thing I found with these teams is a lack of being aware, like they did not know what is happening. We're afraid to know what's happening to me in my job, like with minors, infractors, or least developed families, where the system takes care of them, but only physically, with a house, a salary, but they do not work with the feelings, with the emotions, and the responsibility that they do have with their life. So I found a team of professionals where these discomfort, they covered it some way or another, because they were not paying attention to what was happening to them. So we know many with addictions to cell phones, even addictions to diagnosing, like the professional team was addicted to giving a diagnosis to the patients they were treating, but not to see what was happening to the patient. Like they did not look inside, so they couldn't see deeply what was happening in these patients. So this awakening also, we see that these also cover very harsh realities of people that were treating people that were abused, abandoned, and battered women, people with addictions, harmful family relations without communication, without love. So what happened in the team of professionals? In the technical teams, psychologists, social workers, and doctors and educators, that sometimes they could not touch that discomfort, that unrest, that part of vulnerability. They couldn't touch it. They couldn't enter that space to be able to see what was underlying the diagnosis or even at the level of organs, because they came with the judged sentence to be interned, etc. So we were participating in that collective dissociation of professionals. So the work there was to start looking inwards, so they could ask themselves, what is happening to me? So what is happening to me? It's a very difficult question, because the first answer is there's nothing wrong with me. I'm fine. I'm doing my job. This minor has got these, is going to enter in a closed center. He behaves like this, but he couldn't talk about the unrest of the minor, but also their own unrest. So what did we find? In the closed centers, where the work was done with coercive measures. You do this, these are the consequences. You don't do this, these are the consequences. So if you don't do this, you will be punished. So compensation or punishment. So we had to, in between that compensation and punishment, do something. To see why this kid was still running away from the internment facilities, for example. So we could connect. And what happened was that the workers did not have that look towards the minors. Most of them, of course, there are always specific cases where you find someone who has a very specific work done, and that is where the kids wanted to be with these professionals. But in general terms, they didn't even treat them as people. So this afternoon I have to go to the house of the kid with the abuse, or this afternoon I have to go to the house with intrafamily violence. So this difficulty of activating awareness and consciousness was necessary before doing anything else. So they just wanted solutions, because my task was to supervise, to see what was happening in the team. But there was a polarity, because they wanted to know what was happening, and another part that didn't want to know. Now, even the system was interested on the workers to be really awake, so that they could question themselves about themselves. So the first thing we had to do was to create a trust bond in between all of us, so we could talk about how are we feeling. Do we trust? Is there a contention? Can I open myself or not? And this was really difficult because among them, the more conflicts in the population, especially with youngsters, more conflicts between them. Like the outside conflict would go inside a bit among professionals. So this first part was kind of the time for seeding what is happening, how can I intervene, planting seeds, how do you relate yourselves, without knowing sometimes part of the biography or why were they there. And in this part, the work was to be able to put ourselves at the service of the phenological, not so much with the patients, but for the team of professionals. This was not easy, because that was changing the approach of what is happening to the minor, instead of what is happening to the minor, what is happening to me, so that they could connect with their blind spots, their dependencies, unresolved gestalts, to be able then to expand. And it was necessary to allude to the second pillar, awareness. In the present, was happening everything. Their difficulty of getting to the impulse, see their shadows, their difficulties to touch the unsolved knots of their own biographies, so that in the future we would get to responsibility, but that was still far away from us. So there was a phase of creating trust, working hard to see who are you? Well, who are you to ask me if there's anything wrong with me, or how am I? So but creating that trust that is horizontal, so that you can work with everything that is happening with them, not only with their users or the kids, but what was happening in their lives with their bosses, with institutions. So putting that at the core of the group, even the distribution, changing the working room, changing everything so we could see each other, so we could open the group, we could even touch the ground, taking shoes off, and I was thinking, what is happening to me? Why can I not treat this kid that has committed a crime, a sexual offense, for example? So many things came out, very interesting from many of them. Some had been abused while they were children, that they had lived in hostile environments. Many of them came from families with maybe not too much tenderness or love, and that's why they ended up working in social services. So we did a very nice proposal that was created by the group, to create a workshop to tackle crime. Because it was very peculiar. With the children, they didn't talk about the crime they had committed. Like they were afraid of going into, there was a kid who had sexually abused from his sister, but they didn't work on that because they were afraid to enter there. So the awareness, stopping, seeing why is this happening to you, we tackled that is in this workshop on crime, where they had to work to take out the fear of crimes, not to make judgment, not to be judgmental and saying, this is an abuser. So this afternoon I have to talk to the abuser. And instead of that, seeing a kid, understanding his story, bringing the family of the minors to the core, to be able to, and to the center, so that they could work with them with family therapy. So we could be touching the unrest of the professional and the unrest of the minor and the family's unrest. So the open view of Gestalt, as we were saying, of being able to see, well, this kid is not abusing of the sister just because he wants. There's a context. There's a field what this is taking place. So we started working on there, and we discovered that he had been abused. That the battering change or the abuse change was there. But in order to get there, workers had to have a receptive attitude of not being judgmental and becoming aware, and to be able to see what's the phenomena that were behind, because these kids really had abuse relations, power abuse relations with his peers, and he made for workers to abuse from here. So it was like working the three levels. Here now, what was happening right now, that they could not intervene, being aware of what was happening, and that would give way to empathy, and finally responsibility. So there was the work with responsibility. They lived it as an obligation at first, but we realized that they left the responsibility in the hands of the system, my boss, the technicians, the people up there. And that was passing from not blaming the people outside of everything, and then assuming, what am I doing in my 8 hours with minors, or in these centers where I have to be with them without being able to leave. So instead of placing the responsibility outside, we placed it inside. And this, for us, it seems something basic in order to be able to grow, but there was like kind of a lack of development in the growth of many of the workers, because they had not gone through this phase where I make myself different from my parents, and I do not blame them. So we had to go there and see, what do I have to do with what's happening in my surroundings? What are the decisions I take? And why I'm not just taking the blame out, blaming the system, politicians, the regional government, the institution, the state. The blame was outside. So we could take the projection and turn it back inside. Like understanding that, for me, this was really interesting, because it was a kind of a process of interrupted maturing, as Fried says. There's a part where that evolution did not take place, and instead of evolution, they stayed in blame. You're to blame, is not my fault. So we saw many people with resent, unrest, hatred, pain, blaming parents, blaming a boss, some other life. And here there was also a trend of what Carmen was saying, to putting oneself in a narcissistic place where I know what is happening to me, I know what is happening to you, and from this is not going to happen again because I already know. It's a false narcissism where there's no view of the other. Because I felt hurt, so you're not going to get close to me, I won't be able to see your pain. So we started to see this also. And they did reflect this in the team in different manners, because they did not create effective relations with the minors. They did not create affection. They took the position of the truth, telling the minors, this is what's happening to you, this is what you have to do, this is what you have to do. It's like if they were interrupting the bond in order to with that person, and getting interested about the infraction that this person had committed, this minor. So it was like kind of a protection. If I protect myself and I do not relate with you, there's no other, it's just me. I look inwards to what it matters to me, and there it's very difficult to be able to work with minors. Minors had symptoms of aggressing the symptom and the workers too. And finally, we could also understand what we saw in the end, how we went from the workers being mere executors of the norms they had to abide by, dictated by a minor who had never seen the minor, but just in those minutes of the trial, and okay, that's the norm, those are the limits, but they have to resound with the minor. I mean, what's the minor needing, and what is the minor, how is the minor being affected? It's like taking it from the order of the judge to the interpersonal relation with the minor. So creating that complicity, that relationship without creating, I don't know, a relation of equals, because it wasn't, but taking the shoes of the, putting themselves in the shoes of the minors. And there was a change in the process. They started to talk to their family members with names and surnames. They could allow themselves to show themselves to the minors. And once these supervision groups were solved, they were like therapy groups, they became the support to be able to work with the unrest generated by treating these kids. And that's the first introduction. I leave it there. Thank you, Ángel.
Muy clarito.
Bueno.
Y ahora seguimos.
And now we move on with Margherita, Spagnuolo. She's a renowned Gestalt practitioner, known to many of us here. She will tell us about the psychopathology of the situation. Being a therapist when tackling the collective trauma. She's founder and director of the Gestalt Institute. This is the institute in Italy. She's a disciple of Isidore Fromm. She's an official member of the New York Institute. She has a book, New for Next in Psychotherapy. Gestalt Therapy in Postmodern Society, that has been translated into 11 different languages. She has recently edited a book, which is very important for her, which is The Psychopathology of the Situation, as mentioned earlier, by Piero Cavalleri, former chairman and honorary member of the European Society for Gestalt Therapy. Please go ahead, Margherita. Thank you.
To fix this.
Now it should be gone, but where is the arrow? Yes, where is the arrow? I don't see. No. Right. Thank you.
To the other page.
It's okay. Okay. So thank you. Thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you to Christine for inviting me. And thank you to my esteemed colleagues, Ángel, José Luis. I'm very happy to be here to dialogue about this actual situation and about the connection between society, psychotherapy, and discomfort. Society, discomfort, and psychotherapy. So I prepared some schema for you that approaches the various decades, in the various decades, how discomfort has developed in society and how Gestalt therapy follows this development of society. This is the large thing. I will then go little by little. And I will present the decades from 50 to 70, from 70 to 90, from 99 to 2010, from 2010 to 2020. And I will approach main cultural aspects of that period, social values, social needs, common complaints, so the suffering, psychotherapy values, common interventions, and political movements. I have prepared slides in English and Spanish, so in order to fit English and Spanish in one slide, I will present decades, each decade separately. So what can we say about the first decade, when Gestalt therapy was founded? What were the main cultural aspects at that time? Mainly freedom from social oppression. It was the time when dictatorships in Western society had fallen down, and so fall of dictatorships, minorities' rights, etc. And the social values were every existence here has their own value. No dichotomic assessments, differences can be accepted. I don't know how many of you were from that time. Many few. I think we are, oh, good. I'm in good company. Okay, I was born in 56, so I was born there, but I know from my parents and the place that I found, the environment that I found when I was born, it was like that. It was just the end of the war, and those were the values. What was the social needs to which psychotherapy models answered? It was to support creativity of the ego against taken for granted development. So the dictatorship wanted everything to be the same, no change, no differences. And the value that the humanistic psychotherapy, and in particular Gestalt therapy, brought were the values of freedom and creativity. What were the complaints of our patients, of the patients? There was no treatment of psychosis at that time, of serious disturbances, but neurosis. And the neurotic problem was, I don't want to sacrifice myself in a marriage. I don't want to follow my parents' path. So it was a neurotic suffering, and serious disturbances were not of interest. What were the psychotherapy values at that time? Well, the famous prayer, Gestalt therapy prayer, I am I and you are you. So autonomy and develop one's own desires. What were the interventions? What did psychotherapy do at that time? Frustration, like, come on, shake. Push for autonomy against accepting a critically reality expand your awareness. You can make it. You can be free. So it was more push. And what political movements at that time? Cold War between West and East, fear of atomic bombs. Now the next 2 decades. We are between 70 and 90. How many of you from that time? So many. Yeah. At that time, the main cultural aspect was narcissism, like economical boom. There was the economical boom in Western society, and economical boom and the freedom of the previous generation brought to the feeling that we can do whatever we want. So at the same time, the drugs entered society, and crisis of institutional bonds like marriage came out, and electronic devices were invented, and trust in what is not human. So the machine was a main value. Machine is better than human beings. The social values were, I deserve to do what I want. If something feels good, it's good. So I have the freedom to do what I want. And there is not an external criteria for choosing my life. Only I can decide what I want to be. Narcissism. No? The social needs at that time. So what was the trend of society? There was solitude that was coming in the society. So incapacity to stay in an intimate relationship, incapacity to see the other, because this goes with the narcissism. And what were the complaints of patients, of clients at that time? There were a lot of alimentary disturbances. Anorexia and bulimia, there were the first forms of alimentary disturbances. Personality disorders came, like borderline, narcissism itself. So psychotherapy moved to studying these kind of more serious disturbances. And drug addiction, a full sense of self seems to be missing in this time. So there is, like, people don't feel themselves, don't feel a whole self. They feel unsure or ambivalent. And psychotherapy values at that time. Studies about serious disturbances start in this time, especially in psychoanalytical realm. Gestalt therapy was very much on neurotic field at that time yet, but psychoanalytical people studied borderline and narcissism, and a wider glance on family and groups at that time, and also alternative forms of communications like trance, the NPL, this kind of studies, altered consciousness. In that time, there was a lot of studies about this. What were the common interventions? Hypnosis, PNL, strategic actions, find yourself through artificial tools. So it seemed that at that time, the trust in the machine was also somehow in the psychotherapy values. Because you trust this hypnotic strategy, trust the PNL. The political movements at that time was attacks to democracy, violent minorities, terrorism against enlightened politicians. Like many enlightened politicians were killed, and violence to keep the status quo. So at that time, from 70 to 90, this was also the political movement. There was terrorism was starting to grow into society. Between 90 and 2010, there is what Bauman calls the liquid society. So the main cultural aspect is fall of gods. No point of reference, no sure points of reference anymore. Overcoming common boundaries, like nothing is forbidden. I can do whatever I want. nobody will prevent me to do what I want. So it was like an expanding narcissism even more, but with a liquid sense of oneself. Social values, it was a time of incredible expansion of contacts among people. How many of you were of this time, more or less, younger people? And you were born in a good time for society. And we can remember, people from my age or even younger, that we did a lot of traveling, a lot of wonderful conferences, a lot of knowledge about expanding our capacity to be in contact. If we wanted to go to some place, it costed nothing to go to the other parts of the world. You know, we had a very good time of exchanging. So easiness in traveling and global communication, a temporary paradise for humanity. The social needs were the sense of self more fragile. Serious disturbances are more spread, and parents are not able to stay with children. So in this time, there is a lack of capacity in parents to stay with their own body and to stay with the children and to build a sense of self in the caregiving relationship. The common complaints, consequently, the common complaints or disturbances at that time was panic attacks. It was like a social effect, you know? The panic attacks, anxiety disturbances, bodily desensitization. Electronic devices replace human interaction. So the young people, the group of young people started to chat via WhatsApp in their devices. They don't know who is next. They just communicate through the devices, through the electronic devices. We are very close to where we are now. And psychotherapy, what did we do in psychotherapy at that time? All psychotherapy methods go through a relational turn. This is the time when we approach the relational methods. Not only Gestalt therapy, but all psychotherapies, psychoanalysis, family therapies, they're all relational, but all psychotherapy methods turned into the relational approach. So following the discovery, for instance, of mirror neurons, so in neurosciences supported this turn of the relational turn. The discovery of mirror neurons was an evidence that our brain is made for contact. And object relational theory and then intersubjective theories like Daniel Stern supported all this. So the list of Gestalt, our institute at that time, my institute, met the New York Institute in a transatlantic dialogue. I want to quote just this episode because in my institute we started to study the relational approach, connected with Daniel Stern, with Vittorio Gallese, with many intersubjective psychoanalysts and also neuroscientists. And we did something interesting at that time. We had this transatlantic dialogue with the New York Institute where we explored something new for Gestalt therapy, that is the developmental approach. I remember the first meeting we had with Ruella Frank there, when we said, oh, we have thought about what developmental approach can be for Gestalt therapy, and she was already developing her own methods. And also the psychopathology. Before that time, it was forbidden to speak of psychopathology in Gestalt therapy. So that relational turn went together with a lot of changes in theoretical development. And the common interventions. What do you feel at the boundary between you and me? So at that time, the Gestalt therapy interventions went from, let's say, empty chair, tell to the chair what you feel to your mother, to focusing more on the relationship with the therapist. So tell me what you feel to your mother. So the relation and the contact boundary was much more implemented, and consequently the field perspective, because the field is the counterpart of the contact boundary. Every time there is contact, every time there is a contact boundary, there is contact. Every time there is contact, there is a contact boundary. And the contact boundary makes the field, because we are together, we are sharing something, we are co-creating something. What I feel with you has a meaning in your life. This is also what I feel with you, client, with the patient, what I feel. For instance, I feel sad, strangely. You are telling me of a nice thing of your life, but I feel sad. How come? So this feeling sad has something to do with your life. It's not something counter-transferal, so something negative, something wrong. But what I feel has to do with your life. This is the concept of contact boundary and also the field. So my senses tell me about your field. What's happening in the meantime at the political level? While we were studying all this, at the political level, the fall of the Berlin Wall allowed a time of inspires humanism between East and West. So the main political event was the fall of the Berlin Wall that allowed a lot of communication. So after this wonderful time, something very bad happened. That is the September 11, the end of a paradise. So what was the cultural aspect? The ghost of the end of humanity, fear of death, and need of rootedness. So from one side, we were all very much hit by this thing that none of us could imagine, and we thought that we can die after this paradise, beautiful moment. Then we fell into the hell that we can die and we cannot control it. And at the same time, there was a need for rootedness, to feel rooted. The social values solve problems in an easy way. So the social values, at the same time, were some tendency to be easy in solving problems were arising, like solve problems in an easy way, avoid difficult solutions. Take a pill, and if you have a pain, it doesn't matter if it will make you damage to your body. Take what you can take today. No worries about the future, because there is no future. So in this decade, just one decade, from 2010 to 2020, we have gone through terrible things. And so the sense of future is no longer there, and many people try to solve the problems just with a pill, with the easiest solution. And social needs are need for rootedness, need to be rooted, need to find a sense of self in caring relationships, need to start from bodily feelings. Carmen was speaking of bodily feelings today. We need to be in touch with our body again and to experiment oneself in contact. How much time do we have?
Tienes 5 o 7 minutos.
Okay. And what are the complaints? So why do our patients come to therapy today? Violence. There are people who are hit by violence or who become violent. Depression. One's own existence is not worthwhile or needed. So the feeling is that, why do I exist? There is no future, and maybe people don't care about me. Why do I exist? It's not worthwhile to live. And one cannot control events of life. I cannot control if a terrorist comes here and we are all dead. And the sense of safety is missing, no sense of agency also. When there is no sense of safety, and no sense of control, we cannot be agent. We cannot have the pleasure to be agentic. So, the values of psychotherapy, what are the values of psychotherapy today? This is our main question in these days, no? We have a lot of studies on trauma. Neurosciences have taught us how to work with traumatic experiences, which is quite different from what we were used to. We cannot work with a traumatic client at the same time as with a neurotic client. These have changed our approach to therapy. So we need to work more bottom-up than from understanding the meaning to the feeling. So the feeling and possibly the meaning, but not the other way around. And stay with the person, just breathe with the person instead of give advices. If a traumatized client tells you, I don't want to go out from home, I don't feel like, it has no meaning to say, well, try to go out, try to go to the physical train. You don't do that, you know? You just stay with this person and breathe with the person, because something, we hope that something will come out. And co-create the sense of being with in a safe environment. So the main thing that we do in psychotherapy is to co-create a sense of safety for the client and for ourselves. Don't pretend to discover a meaning or traumatic events, but let self-regulation create neurological connections. I developed the paradigm of reciprocity to help psychotherapists focus on the dance they do with their patients and orient themselves to their active and harmonious presence in the various moments of psychotherapy. So the concept of reciprocity and the concept of dance, which means there is not one single action that is correct, not a single action on the patient to understand him, but the meaning and the healing comes from the dance, how we adjust one to the other, how do you feel, do we orient ourselves via our senses. Common interventions, unfortunately, CBT and easy strategic solutions are very much developed today because people are not in contact with themselves. So, like a pill, no? CBT is like a pill. And the dramatic sharing of human tragedy or pandemic and war consequences are the issue of the therapist burnout emerges. So we cannot avoid to think that we are also traumatized. And for this I developed a construct of aesthetic relational knowing to help therapists understand the intentional movement of the patients in the field or situation of psychotherapy. What's the political movement? So you know, since 9/11, the fall of human vanity and safety, migration flows, terrorism, climate change, pandemic, war in Ukraine, explosion of uncontrolled situation in Africa, return to polarization between East and West societies, or dictatorial or democratic systems. So here is where we are, and we need to dialogue a lot about how to approach this. I have written this in this book, Psychopathology of the Situation. And to end, even before, what was the risk to which society was exposed before the pandemic? Even before the pandemic, social feeling was characterized by certain issues that I set out in more detail in other presentations, and bodily desensitization and need for relational grounding, loss of unitary sense of self, so increase in borderline psychotic disorders, difficulty in assessing emotions and integrative functions, loss of capacity of emotion and relational tolerance, increased exposure to trauma, depression, so lack of future and desire to be desired, the lack of jobs and future that has emerged with the economic crisis is also linked with relational factors. For example, we cannot deny that there is more worrying caregivers and less capacity for relational containment. So before the pandemic and the war, the role of psychotherapy was to resensitize the body, to regain a sense of self, to support relationships starting from primary ones, to support the ability to be in constitutive relationships, like couples, family, work groups, and the desire to be unique citizens, capable of making a meaningful contribution to the social community. But what's the risk of society after pandemic? Pandemic and war fit into this already fragile experiential background, but with very different effects, because the pandemic made us feel helpless and fragile, the psychotherapists as well. So let's see what we can do at an individual level. We have to work with the loss of the taken for granted physiological securities necessary to live, like sleep, breathing. I think we need to start from the very beginning of life with children, to teach parents to stay with their children as soon as they are born. So to breathe with them, not to leave them alone when they are scared, but to provide a hook to the newborns, because they need that. They need to breathe and to feel that the caregiver is close to them. And then at a relational level, we seek social closure, violence and intolerance, return to primitive modes of defense, inability to transcend oneself, to create something new with the other. Yes, I finished, okay. So let's try to work with adolescents and also with murders or women that are very, very often today. At the social level, we have violence, etc. I go on. But the main challenge is at the political level, and we are experiencing it in these days in associations also, where there is a lack of a sense of belonging to the social community and of the moral strength to fight corruption. People are more focused in saving themselves than in opening themselves to the trust to the other. And I hope that this feeling of mutual trust will emerge in this conference and among Gestalt therapists. We can be a guideline for humanity if we understand how to trust, how to go out of ourselves, of our future, and how to trust the other and relationships. So this is the last time. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Margherita.
Sorry.
Información muy valiosa, muy bien organizada. Muchísimas gracias. Vamos a seguir ahora con José Luis Pérez. ¿Podemos seguir?
We'll now resume José Luis Pérez.
José Luis Pérez nos va a hablar de lo que ha titulado
José is going to talk about what he has titled Do you need to talk to your colleague? Can we come back here? Yes, please. Thank you. José Luis Pérez is a psychologist, former president of the European Association of Gestalt Therapy between 1996 and 2003, president of the first and third National Congress on Gestalt in Barcelona and Málaga, Barcelona 98, Málaga 1917, co-founder of different schools of Gestalt therapy, and he is going to talk about the self-knowledge, from the dissemination of self-knowledge to the trivialization of malaise. He's going to provide a different approach. Thank you. Microphone, please. Sorry, interpreters cannot hear. You can hear me now? Okay. I was saying thank you, Cristina. Thank you, Margherita. I've ticked all the troubles of 60 years of life since I was born. I've ticked them. I've gone through all the pathologies that have appeared decade after decade. They have been a very intense experience for me, honestly. Thank you. Why this title, From the Dissemination of Sex Knowledge to the Trivialization of Malaise? As a general thesis, I think that this fashion, because it is a fashion in different ways, this fashion of self-knowledge being part of life, though it is very superficial, the life of major sectors of the population, this has been used to be more known, to have more people interested about the topic, but of course this also entails the dilution, the soup of the soup of the soup of the soup of the chicken soup. And generally speaking, and as the capitalist market creates a product of everything, even a product of the awareness and the product of the self-knowledge and self-awareness, and it's being used to turn it against its original objective, because a direct consequence of this dissemination of self-knowledge is the trivialization of the discomfort, the malaise. There comes a time in which, as everyone and everything is bad, it no longer is important for us. We no longer care, we adapt, and we believe that we are either exaggerating or inventing something, and little by little we buy, we believe, deeply believe, that there is not so much and it's just out of our way of being, so just get the most of what you have now. And from here, I want to bring back the need and the value of knowing ourselves that we're bad and rehabit the fact that we are bad, that we're not well, not as something desirable. We all want to have fun, to be happy, etc., but not flying away, running away from two fundamental ways of the how we can be, the awareness of being not being well, being bad, by avoiding, for example, of many ways, and especially the narcotization or the dissociation, the progressive dissociation of our discontent, our malaise. In the opposite side is the reaction to the discomfort in a continuous way, which is the somatization, the generalization in any environment or scope of the internal discomfort that enters into dialogue and in a cycle, an endless loop of internal, external discomfort, which are that feed each other. I had prepared a series of signs and causes of discomfort or malaise, but of course, after having listened to Jordi and Margherita, it would be just these, how are we bad and why are we bad? But I'd like to especially talk about the one that concerns me the most as general sign of discomfort or malaise, which is the increase of children's suicide, which crushes, destroys families, society, but at the same time is a crystal clear sign of the fact that we're doing something so badly that even children do not grow up having the possibility to manage that anguish because they have neither means nor a concept or an environment in the family or socially that will accompany them preventing the suicide, but also the suicidal ideas and children depression. This on one side. And of course, our society continuously creates causes for unrest, discomfort or malaise, and solutions or patches. Something that really strikes me is the geometric design of the industry of leisure and entertainment. Economically speaking, is the sector that grows the most every year worldwide. They are constantly finding different ways to entertain us. And it's used, especially when we're so bad that we don't know of other ways to be able to survive. We can just focus on being entertained, feeling pleasure, being distracted, giving us a break, etc., etc. And in leisure, when we talk about leisure, we talk about Netflix, holidays in paradise, etc., etc., etc. About that, let me say that my approach or perception of malaise has to do with anxiety. And this is somewhat more, I have it written. In the psychopathology manuals, we always make a difference between anxiety as a trait or as a status. Malaise related, limited, even if it's our imagination or expectation, can be perceived as something temporary, transitory, and therefore it can be bearable. No matter if it comes back, there's always room for the memory that has already happened, or for the hope that these will also pass. But when the malaise lasts and becomes eternal and merges our subjective times, past, present, and future, they intermingle in an amalgama of traumatic experience of the past, lived in that endless moment, and projected to the endless future without compassion. Anxiety cancels any other alternative. It turns to the single current, to the only way where we're trapped. Its self-agitation, emotional agitation is absolute, purged from the last neuron that can create a pause that may generate a divergence in that force that only admits more intensity, looking for the final climax, for our deep, anxious despair. It is endless. It's recharged only to start again. That rock that rounds and rounds down the hill with greater speed once and over again. And it gets closer, it reaches you, it hurts you, and it seems that it kills you. But no, it won't kill you. And oftentimes, that is devastating. Anxiety, discomfort. And I think that it is an experience that, to a lesser or bigger extent, it accompanies all our patients, clients, and users, however you may name them. The only thing that we have learned is to minimize it, to dissociate, to bypass it, or to justify it. I think that's not the turn of that now. I think general malaise or social discomfort, it brings us closer to apocalypses. The apocalypse to one apocalypse, or to the day-to-day apocalypse, to today's apocalypse, to the daily apocalypse. Apocalypse means revelation. It means taking back to light. Not only do we have that conception of destruction, total destruction, which on the other hand, we are just playing our cards there, but it can also mean the moment when the crisis becomes such that we can understand that that hope starts to appear, or there's a possibility to redo certain things. That is, it is that moment of crisis when what was about to die can finally die, and something has to die so something can rebirth hope. And with that, we get to the moment when the person comes to our office. How much time have I got left? And in therapy, why do they come for therapy? Well, I think in general terms, the personal process, this trip towards self-knowledge, is a kind of process of personal apocalypse, so that we can tolerate ourselves in constant and repeated apocalypses where one finds each other all through life. So what can we contribute? How can we contribute as therapists in this space? I understand this office, our therapy, as the place to recreate the trust in the other. But sometimes that recovering the trust of the other needs first to learn to trust in oneself. In that intrapsychic aspect, we have all our rejections, all our fears, every time we've felt betrayed, etc., lie there, and that we reproduce them with ourselves by polarizing ourselves in aspects that do not communicate with each other. And we spend our life getting distracted and believing that what's outside is worse than what's inside. I think that in our therapy, in the office, in our sessions, we must be able to balance the need to adapt to change with the need to integrate and stabilize, become stable in the new situation. It's like being in a ship in the high seas. If you stay still, you'll fall because of the waves. And if you fall, you won't be able to stand up. So we have to be constantly sailing through, allowing for the waves to make you move, but without falling. So, in the end, I believe that we must, in therapy and in life, call for the right to disturb, to be disturbed, and to be bothered, understanding that the relationship with the other generates discomfort because it takes us from our comfort area, what I know, etc., etc. And what the other can contribute with, even if it's uncomfortable, it's also part of your psychology, intrinsic psychic heritage, and your evolution. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you very much, José Luis, for your contribution. It's been very different. We don't have much time. I'm so sorry because I gave too much time to Margherita because she had prepared many things and they were so interesting. So can they have a dialogue? Can we take questions from the floor? I don't know if you have questions or comments to the other presentations. Maybe you can have a dialogue between you. We have just a little time. Yes, I've been focusing on the social case, but also education. What happens with the discomfort in education? Because we're not educating to be. The current education is oriented to act, to do. We train people so that they meet what the society is interested of. So we are not educating to be. We don't question. We do importance to memory, to memorize, but we don't question about what does the kid want. Or, for example, philosophy, creativity, these are not subject matters in school. And that has to do with what we're talking about. Keeping the people asleep so they don't question the system. So they don't question this discomfort that comes from the system. I don't know how you see this. Yes, we educate to create producers and consumers. We don't educate to co-create people. It's a thing of the market. That's a market thing. Yes, the person who generates the unrest contributes for unrest to still be covered.
We are so small in this huge, in this huge situation that, of course, education is very, very important. More important than psychotherapy. What can we do, psychotherapists? We are so small in front of all this disaster. And nevertheless, we need to stay there and do the minimum, or that is the maximum that we can do. So yes, the education is something so important. I think the education and primary relationships and jobs are the three main things where we as Gestalt therapists should work more, or should work with much hope. So education is, I don't know about Spain, but in Italy, the students don't let teachers to go to do their lecture. There is a great discomfort, and parents are against teachers, so they defend. They protect somehow the children. So it's so huge. The discomfort is so huge that the question is, what can we do as Gestalt therapy in this situation? I think we can stay with the hope, creating vitality in small situations, maybe having groups or trying to speak with teachers and do what we can do. Yeah.
Claro, pero creo que con la...
Yes, but with psychotherapy, in the social part, we don't get many places. Not everyone can pay the price of psychotherapy. Claudio Naranjo said that for many years, he said that he fought to change education, to change the world. He didn't manage to change that. In Spain, there were some attempts, but I think that we have to leave our sessions and leave our office. So we must generate everything outside, because not everyone comes to our offices. So we have to act in the social sphere, in education, in health. So we have to call for our place there, in our hospital, in a school, in a social attention center, to take therapy there, because they're not being asked. Some cases, yes, when there's great unrest. But in general terms, it's like, I feel the responsibility of taking Gestalt to those spaces. Otherwise, the change won't come. There is a part in the of contagion, and because people don't want to break awake and leave them rest, but the system is allowing them to still be asleep, like AI, the technology, the series. We are with the cell phone seeing what is happening outside this room, so this is not favoring. I would like to have a more active movement of Gestalt to go to the public sphere, to the institutional sphere. In any case, I think that taking the Gestalt therapy to education or to the social sphere does not correspond to psychotherapists. Teachers, educators, etc., are necessary, not psychotherapists. They need to apply the therapy in those fields, and psychotherapists, because we have that need, that way of seeing things, to psychologize everything. But depending on the environment, it's other people, other ways that have to bring Gestalt. Not psychotherapists, but Gestalt. To train educators on Gestalt, train physicians in Gestalt, social workers in Gestalt, so they know how to use Gestalt. Yes, not psychotherapists, we've got enough. Yes, to facilitate students becoming not only psychotherapists, but they are in the public spaces by having that support. Yes, that's the sense. Otherwise, there will be a part of the therapy that looks inwards too much. What we are doing Gestalt with, what Margherita has described, but how do we take Gestalt outside? Gestalt has and had with Fritz and Laura a vindicative spirit fighting against the system, so that we take Gestalt, not that we do therapy, but we train physicians, social workers, educators, teachers, so that they can use Gestalt and generate that change. Margherita, I don't know if you want to add something?
Yes. Gestalt therapy was when it was born. It was born to be against dichotomies. So individual and society is a dichotomy that they wanted to overcome. So it's in our blood that we are social activists, not only psychotherapists. Being psychotherapists means also being social activists. We cannot forget society when we are with a client. So this is very clear for us. We are everywhere we are, every situation we work as psychotherapists, or maybe training teachers and so on. We never forget that society and individual are the same thing. So I agree with you, and also agree that everywhere, maybe one person prefers to be a private psychotherapist. It's okay. Maybe some others prefer to teach teachers. It's okay. But we are anyway Gestalt therapists. Yeah?
Agree with you.
Y creo que lo que estamos diciendo.
Yes, and I think that what we are saying for the time we've been here is that Gestalt provides that capacity to facilitate contact, to facilitate relations, to facilitate putting yourself in the shoes, in between, to be able to be people, inhabited persons, with capacity to feel what we feel, to feel unrest, malaise, to be together, to nourish ourselves, to heal ourselves. And that is political. That has got also a political branch that can go even beyond our offices. And also learn to dance.
Because he's also right,
Yes.
also Luis. I think that we need to define the situations. If we are private psychotherapists, we are private psychotherapists. If we are Gestalt therapists who work in a school, then it's different. So I think you're right, that we need to define our role. Sorry, I wanted to complete that.
Ok. ¿Tenéis alguna pregunta, algún comentario? ¿Quién trae el micrófono, por favor? Vale, aquí delante.
English.
Gracias. Felicitar, agradecer.
Thank you. I would like to congratulate you and thank you. I'm concerned. We come from Mexico, and I think the situation over there is even worse, is even beyond the apocalypse in a myriad of different senses. There is a very strong demand from many patients, even before getting to therapy. They come from such difficult situations. It is so difficult to pay for the sessions because the purchasing power is so much lower compared to Europe. There is so much demand. They need to go to therapy and they make an extraordinary effort. It's very difficult for them to keep going to see the therapist because it's too expensive. There's so many people looking for solutions, how to solve the problems, how to tackle the challenges. I would like to hear anything you can contribute with. There's one thing to start with. We have the responsibility, which helps us build ourselves as people and help us mature. And Gestalt has a responsibility beyond the therapy room. That is a very sensitive matter. It seems that free things have no value, but we do have a commitment towards society to generate changes, in order to be able to work as part of a community, creating spaces, community spaces perhaps, to cater for the needs of society. And in that relationship we establish with the others, we should be able to support them, but going beyond our comfort zone, of course. With that community view or vision. The approach during consultation, during the sessions, well, I think we're underdeveloped. Let me explain that. Socially speaking, from an educational standpoint, we've been losing that part of us that has an aggressive instinct. The instinct that allows us to face difficult situations. I'm talking about myself, to start with. I usually try to facilitate others feeling their own anger, feeling their own discomfort, and exercising protests. I'm talking about social protests and individual protests. There is a lot of self-complacency and a very patronizing attitude towards ourselves. There's so many needy people out there. And I keep telling them, get angry at yourself, because that anger, deep down, will give you the energy. We have the energy within us to either change things, improve things, or adapt ourselves to what is happening around us. Then, if we have a supportive environment, if we have a sense of community, even better. But apply intrapersonal support and then interpersonal support, if possible, social support. As we do with all human passions, remember about anger.
I like this idea of this need to. I like this need to not to be depressed, not to be depressed in this situation. It's a huge task that we as psychotherapists and Gestalt therapists have. How not to get depressed in this world. It would be a title of an important issue. So I agree that we need to do a huge work on ourselves, not to be depressed and to find a hope. What's the hope today? How can we give hope, but also find hope in ourselves? So you have quoted Mexico. I was in Mexico 10 days ago, and it was, I understand what you mean. I could also tell you that here in Europe, we live the tragedy of the war in Ukraine, and we can see Russian colleagues who cannot complain, who cannot protest, because they are put into jail for 20 years and they lose their life. And so there are Gestalt therapists. Either they go out from Russia or they stay, but how can they stay? How can they continue to be Gestalt therapists without the power to fight their government? Because it's not a democratic government. So it's a huge tragedy there, no? So how to give hope in such a oppressing situation? And nevertheless, I think we have to do a huge work on ourselves. Where is the hope? How can we create hope?
Bueno, ¿qué más?
Anything else?
Yeah, it's the time.
Vamos
¿Se
terminando.
escucha? Ok. Bueno,
This is a cause for a big concern, this global situation, because of what Margherita explained. In the history of the world, in the current situation, we've seen military conflicts throughout history, such as the ones we have today. But focusing on their proposals, which I really liked to hear about, in Mexico, we have been working already on what you have proposed, Ángel, focusing on a more humane approach, a more humane education. We have invited very distinguished authors and teachers who have replicated in their schools what they've seen. We've been invited ourselves by schools, and step by step we are finding a way to deliver a message to the population at large. I think this is a big opportunity, facing this apocalypse together with very specific proposals. Iñaki, for example, has been developing an approach for community Gestalt therapy. There are activities that are taking place out there. I think we can start thinking about new ones and try to do it together. Thank you so much. I think we can finish here. Thank you very much indeed.